Hi, Ron Kubitz with the PHRA Social Media Committee, here again at the annual conference. Just heard an excellent closing keynote by our guest here today, Audrey Russo. She is the President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. Audrey, it's pleasure to meet you, glad to have you here. For those that maybe aren't that familiar, can you give a brief overview of the mission and the PTC and some of the benefits?
Yeah, the PTC is approaching our 30th year, so our business is a trade association, and we focus on four things. Four things are to make sure that the technology ecosystem is thriving in this region, and that's across southwestern Pennsylvania, which includes working with our elected officials to design policy that makes sure that we are a thriving region and that we are supporting them. The other thing is that we focus on exposure and telling stories and making sure that this region and beyond understand the kinds of companies and the kinds of work and talent that's living in this region. So we do whatever we can in any format to convey that message, because very often people are pretty busy, they don't understand how to tell their stories, and even the big companies, the multinationals, really want people in the region to know them in lots of different ways. So we also provide business development for companies, making sure that they can get access to capital and they get access to business opportunities. And then lastly, we provide support for talent, making sure that very, very specific niche talent is sought after in a way that perhaps many companies just can't do on their own. And in engineering and computer science, there are specific skills that very often it's hard for them to attract.
Mm-hmm. What specifically does the Technology Council do then maybe to attract some of this IT and engineering talent? Because obviously you're going to have to go outside of our area in a lot of cases too.
Yeah, I mean, we have incredible universities here, and I mean a good 20 that are in the epicenter from Pittsburgh, and you look beyond, they're pretty notorious for really having top talent. So it's just not enough. I mean, the same thing is the issue in New York, and the same thing is the issue in Silicon Valley. And as once someone said to me, who is now the former chairman of Google, said there's not enough smart people in the world perhaps to solve some of these really, really hard problems. So, we go to universities, we do some job fairs very often, we do some things that perhaps some of these small companies really can't get the tentacles out to do. We try to help with talent that's sort of fresh out of school very often, but we also run into people who are very experienced. And when you look at the workforce today, as I mentioned in my closing, it's a 4-generation workforce very often. So, you can't just assume that there are people who are all across that span, don't have the skills that you need. And believe it or not, people are mobile. And all that's happening in Pittsburgh has been helpful in terms of our exposure to some of what's happening in Pittsburgh. Places to live, quality of life, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now you actually mentioned in your keynote, you talked about social media, obviously the social media committee here. How do you see the PTC, how are some of their interactions? What are some of the things they're doing to reach out to IT, engineering talent, companies via social media?
Well, since I've been there, we have a very active Twitter account, and I myself and a couple of other people are on that all day long. Mm-hmm. Trying to make sure that we are seeing what the conversations are out there around talent and around public policy and the issues that really matter to us, and figuring out some pathways for us to engage with them. So that's a very powerful source of communication that we receive from potential customers, from trends around the world. We have Facebook, we have you name it in terms of social media, we're definitely doing it. We have a blog where we're really sharing out information, what's happening here in the region, and the amount of activity on that site is constantly moving upward. Our career site is constantly moving upward with about 45,000 hits a month of people looking for all these kinds of jobs. So it's something that has to be care and fed. It's not something that you just sort of put out there and think that it's just going to exist like it would in a magazine or it would in more static information. So it makes it pretty exciting for us. We have to stay on our toes, but it's also a vehicle for us to get feedback, and in terms of making sure that we're relevant, so we can see what kinds of trends and companies, particularly startups, really are looking for, what they need.
Great. Obviously, we're big proponents of that here too, so that always works out well. I read somewhere that some of the IT and some of the technical disciplines, job-wise, and even here in Pittsburgh, some of the talent, in some cases up to 50% actually come from outside of the U.S., some of the students. How important is it not only to attract, but to keep some of these folks here in the Pittsburgh area as well once they graduate?
From outside of the
Yes,
U.S.?
yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. And, unfortunately, the last, 10 years, the United States has not been as aggressive as they should be in terms of immigration. There have been a couple of pieces of legislation that have really fell on their face. One is, the Startup Visa Act, and with the intention, and that was bipartisan piece of legislation, and the intention was for anyone who graduated from a university, an American university, and they had, I think it was $250,000 in investment, and they were able to sort of stamp onto them and have a green card. As someone who's my parents are first generation Americans, and they had quite an opportunity by coming over here. So I think it's in my DNA, as well as just being in the tech business, to know that smart people come from all over. And we are educating those people here. Why would we not want to embrace them? Because
Sure.
many of them want to stay. So, but just so you know, I think there's some data that just came out from a gentleman by the name of Vivek Wadhwa, who is a faculty at Duke. And he reports that I think the last 2 years we're really seeing slippage in terms of company startups, and and drawing a correlation between that and foreign-born educated in the U.S.
That's too bad. Now, if I recall correctly, I believe the 30th anniversary is coming up in 2013.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes.
from what you know, from obviously the time you've been associated, what are some of the highlights you think of the last few years from the Tech Council?
Well, if I can just go all the way back, one of the things that I've been doing is I have been interviewing our forefathers who were around to create the Tech Council and the ecosystem. So I've just finished interviewing Governor Thornburgh. I've interviewed people like Jay Aldridge, Jim Coker, and all these men. And I got to tell you, I'm really honored to be able to carry the torch
Sure.
in terms of what we're doing. Because you know what? Everything that we're working on now and everything that I finished telling you about was part of their vision.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty exciting to know that, it's been, obviously the journey's had its ups and downs. The economy has moved up and down. There have been, a lot of growth in the 90s. Then you had the bubble burst.
Yeah.
But I think what's been most exciting for me is that in the 5 years that I've been there, I've been able to take the organization back to the vision of those forefathers, who I'm now trying to capture their stories to see what their vision was and what they really worked on against all odds.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, sometimes the best way to success is look back at roots and go back. So that's
So
excellent.
it's really
So,
been fun.
now, you obviously gave an excellent closing keynote here, and as you're aware, the theme for our conference has been change, evolve, and grow. Where do you see HR, Tech Council, where do you see them changing, evolving, and growing as we go down the road?
Well, from the HR, the practitioners and the people that work in HR, a couple of things I think that become, really interesting. I don't want to say that they're obstacles, but it's really interesting to be in a workforce where you have 4 generations now, maybe 4+ generations. Whereas before you maybe had 2+ generations, right? People got packages, they knew that they were going to retire, or they reinvented themselves at a certain milestone. And now, I talk to people who they never want to retire, they don't see any end. And so then you've got people on that end of their, where they are in their life, and then you've got younger people who are coming in with a lot of fantastic skills, a lot of experience, a lot of perspective, very, very nimble, embracing social media as though, you and I drink coffee, and then getting into work environments where what all they're interested in is learning and having experience and making an impact, and not where their career is going to head and stay there. So there's, policy design and, the way that you incent people and flexibility in the workforce, and what does it mean to work 40 hours a week? What does it mean to work from home? And all those issues now really get exacerbated.
Sure.
Whereas before, we talked about it for a while. Oh, we're going to wrap a policy around that. We're going to do some things. We've got FMLA. But now I think the exciting part is, now what about all those intersections where people are really, that's what they expect. It's not even, it's not even just a a nice to have. It's what they expect. What do you mean I'm going to get 2 weeks vacation after I'm here for a year?
Yeah. Speaking of excitement, I know you're associated with the Tech Vibe radio program. It's every Saturday at noon on 104.7.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, Jonathan Kirsting on my team, he works for us, and he is the director of visibility, which includes all the things that you guys, know and love in terms of social media and content, and as well as static media and print. We do a show together, and we started out on Ron Morris's station, and it was an AM, a low terrestrial, but it allowed us to do some 3-hour live radio, and we really got in the cadence of one another, going back and forth. And then we left there, did a really short sit on KQB, and I said, Jonathan, we have to take the message wider. And here's why we need to take the message wider, because we need to talk to people who are going to be proud of what's happening in this region, and I'm afraid they don't know. Let's talk to those people.
Sure.
So we looked at what radio station has the widest talk, what radio station meets an audience that we normally would never communicate with, and what has wide terrestrial. So we went to 104.7, and we have a ton of fun. So our objective is to break down technology, to introduce people to all the things that are happening here in the region, and it be a pervasive way of how people think, no matter where they work, where they live, and what their knowledge is in technology.
That's great. Obviously, that would be fun. And speaking of fun, we'll end on this note. If someone didn't really know you that well, what would be one thing that somebody may be surprised to know about you?
Surprised to know about me? I really, really would love to be a competitive weightlifter.
I better stand back now. And what got you interested in that?
I think it's performance, it's competing with yourself, it's, and I'm very far from it, so very far from it. But I'm very mesmerized by that.
But speaking of performance, excellent, again, keynote. We were certainly proud to have you here at the annual conference.
Thank you.
And I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.